Thank you for the reminder because I so frequently forget.
Yeah, I wrote it down. I would have also forgotten. Can you guys see the presentation? Yeah, okay. So feel free to ask questions anytime. Paul, free range to correct anything I say that may be wrong or if I omit any important details. But today's talk will go briefly over the importance of filtration, factors that go into choosing a filter, and presenting some results and findings from the tests that I've been taking in the lab. So the purpose of an air filter. A filter serves a variety of purposes. It helps to prevent dust and debris from accumulating in vital components of the HVAC system, helps to increase the lifespan of the equipment. A clean filter helps to lessen the energy consumption of the HVAC system. A filter allows for better airflow through the HVAC system, helps to maintain indoor temperatures, humidity levels. Perhaps the most important, most intuitive purpose in general is to limit particles from entering the home comfort system or indoor environment. This is what most people tend to think of, but a filter has many implications in the overall HVAC system itself. For the purpose of sapphires, the filter is designed or aimed to be able to prevent particles from entering the home comfort system or indoor environment during times of highly adverse air quality events that contain harmful pollutants like wildfire smoke, for example. So there are several factors that influence the selection of a filter, one of which is adequate particle filtration, making sure that the particles are actually getting trapped and actually being prevented from entering the indoor environment, because what's the purpose in having a filter that doesn't do what it's intended to do, right? Another one is the filter lifespan. Um, a filter could do like a particularly good job, but its longevity may not last that long. And again, with that kind of comes the need for more frequent replacement. So it's an important factor as well. Affordability. This kind of goes hand in hand with the previous 2 points. We want to minimize the cost of the filter for user accessibility and convenience, especially with taking into account more vulnerable communities, which means trying to find the right balance between prevention of particles and longevity or lifespan of the filter. And then the ability to support a flow rate that allows full pressurization of the home. So air filters can restrict airflow if they're too dense or if the HVAC system is not designed to handle their resistance. This can lead to reduced efficiency of the HVAC system and a higher energy consumption, which also plays a role in the cost and affordability for users, can lead to equipment failure. Air filters also create a pressure drop as air is passed through them. If the drop is too high, it can put a lot of strain on the HVAC system, hinders its ability to properly maintain pressure levels throughout the home. So choosing a filter with a pressure drop that the system can handle is important for maintaining full pressurization. I can't see the chat, so if you guys have anything, then whoops.
Hey,
Um,
Paul shared a fun history fact, but he can share it with you later. Can I stop you here though? Because you've used words like pressure drop and so on. I just want to see and open the floor if people are not in this field, especially if you have been around for just a week or two, and you don't know what any of these terms mean, please ask, because Misa's doing a really great engineering presentation. Um, but these terms are not familiar to everybody. So I'm speaking particularly at you, Pi. I know you're an engineer, and I'm not meaning to highlight you, but I know you're an engineer, but I know this also isn't your field, and I think you do a lot of data stuff. And so if we're introducing totally new things where you're like, what? Then you would not be the only one who could benefit from more clarity. So please feel free to speak up and don't be like, I'm the new person. I should know what's going on.
Yeah, completely valid. I mean, it took me I've been here for 7 months and I still like I still don't know a lot of the terms, so it takes a little bit to build up. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, like feel free, interrupt me, do whatever you need to do. Um, yeah, no shame. I won't feel bad. I won't take it personally. Are you guys good? Okay. Um, so experimentation, as I mentioned before, I've been running experiments at the Powerhouse, in the Applied Engineering Research for Indoor Environments Lab under the direction of Paul. And here we've been focused on gathering relevant data by testing various filter types of various depths, to test for particle filtration efficiency, the longevity of the filter, um, and the pressure drop, which is the pressure difference between before and after the filter. Um, so there's a lot that goes into the test. I just put this for clarity to see that like there's a bunch of different components that are included. It just basically serves the purpose of showing everything that's involved in running a test. I had developed like a standard operating procedure, which includes all of the proper procedures needed to maintain a quality experiment. And this is from that document. I just kind of copied and pasted it. Um, Although everything's important on this for the performance and quality of a test, I've highlighted a couple of the more essential aspects of the test. First, there's obviously the filter itself. Um, there were a variety of filters that were tested. Even before I had hired, there had been testing of filters that I didn't do personally, but that other students previously in the lab had done. Um, Second is the generation of particles itself, to inject into the duct to properly gauge the particle filtration before the filter and after the filter. And I'll speak about this a little bit more later. There's also the manometer to help measure the pressure drop before and after the filter, or the pressure difference or whatever, and flow of the duct system, which in our case was a Tech DG 1000. The Model B duct blaster, which actually helps like pull the flow through the duct system. Um, and then a particle concentration measurement device to help actually quantify the amount of particles, which was the purpose of the dust track. Um, the taps were
Hey,
also
Misa,
important.
yeah, are you going to
Yeah,
be able to share pictures of this?
next slide.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, the taps are important to help connect the dust track to upstream and downstream to measure the particle concentration. There were also other technical aspects of the tests, like the flow rate setting of the duct blaster, the salt particle concentration levels, and then the length of the testing time of an overall test that was chosen depending on the phase of the testing that we were in. Ta-da, pictures. So usually when I'm in these team meetings, I'm actually in the area lab and you can see the house of pressure in the background. But if I were to tilt my camera slightly to my left a little bit more, you'd see a duct system spread across two tables. And this is what that is. These are the dust tracks that are used for particle concentration measurements. There's one upstream before the filter, one downstream after the filter. There's like a white mini fan that's turned on. There'll be more pictures, don't worry. It'll all make sense soon. Um, but this is where we clamp the concentration to help inject it into the duct system. And this is mostly primarily used to help with the mixing. Um, Another angle. So if you look really, really closely, you can notice the most important part of this picture. is actually the House of Pressure Wizard Jordan in the background. You can also see the filter placement in the duct system here. This is the filter. Uh, being held together by a couple of clamps and two flanges, which are kind of hard to tell, but I have another picture that will make it a little bit more noticeable. Um, it's kind of hard to see, but the tap is right here where the dust track gets connected to. It's basically just like an L-shaped metal straw. Um, that's the best way I can describe it. But there's one upstream and then there's one downstream. Um, and then the tubing for the pressure measurement before the filters, this little blue plastic tubing. Um, here is kind of the other half of the duct system. This is I don't even know how to describe it, a yellow duct extension that I kind of put out of the window and airy to kind of release the flow outside instead of just having it circulate in the lab or whatever. Um, the red and green tubing that's right here, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but it's placed before and after the duct blaster to help quantify or gauge the flow rate. Yeah, okay.
Right, the flow is based on the pressure across the fan, and so there are two pressure taps to measure that pressure across the fan.
Okay. Um, but yeah, basically just one long duct system. Pretty big. It takes up a lot of space. Again, this is two tables. This is the actual concentration setup. Um, it's placed at the entrance of the duct system, and it's generated by compressed air that goes through like an air purification system or process to help ensure that the air is as clean as can be and doesn't introduce other particles. The concentration sits in a glass jar um, with a nebulizer lid, and it's clamped in place like directly behind the white mini fan. But yeah, this is the salt DI water concentration that's used to help generate the particles. And then this is just like another view of the filter. The flanges were a little harder to see earlier, but it's just like two um, on either side of the filter, and then the clamps all around to kind of tighten it in place, and then everything else I just kind of like tape up and seal with duct tape to kind of provide a better seal to keep the air from leaking there as much as possible. Um, but yeah, this is the duct system. This is what I work with. So timeline wise, I started working here late August, and the first thing that I started with was the filter selection testing in August, which then moved into longevity testing in February, and am now currently focusing on flow rate dependency testing. Um, TBD for future development. It's going into the summer, but we'll be exploring HEPA depths and housings, altering the particle source outside of the current salt concentration formulation, and working with higher flow rates. But we'll get to that soon too. So the first task was exploring which filter performed the best for the removal of particles. We tested 3 filters overall since I've been here. We tested a MERV 13 with 12 by 12 by 4 inch dimensions, a HEPA filter with 12 by 12 by 6 inch dimensions, and then another HEPA filter with 12 by 12 by 12 inch dimensions. So this picture, it includes all of the filters that were available, but only 3 of them were tested on my part. Others were tested beforehand again, that I wasn't involved in. We also took a couple of tests in 4 positions in the upstream part of the duct, to see if there was any major deviation in particle concentration, to see, if proper mixing was occurring. And you can see the layout here. You can kind of see here, there's like, this is the upstream tap, that's just kind of placed in the duct, but there were 4 all around. And so just kind of like playing around to see whether there was, I don't know, a bigger concentration reading at one of the spots versus another. There wasn't really, like, it was all pretty uniform. And this was all just to really gauge like mixing and stuff.
And to be fair, real quick, we did that because when we were first trying to do this, we didn't have good mixing, and that's why the little white fan got put in place. And so then we had to confirm that that white fan was doing a good enough job of mixing.
Hey, Misa, there's a question in the chat. Aaliyah, maybe you just want to read it
Yeah,
out. Shout out.
I was just wondering about the filters. Are those custom ones that you've ordered or put together yourselves, or are they basically what you could buy, what people would use for their at-home HVAC systems that folks already have?
Paul, you purchased them, right?
Yeah. So they were all commercially available. Now a person at home putting one into their HVAC system would not choose something as small as 12 by 12. So, but these were still just off, I mean, not exactly off the shelf. You don't go to Home Depot and find 12 by 12 filters, but you can go to filterbuy.com and get 12 by 12 filters. The HEPA filters were also commercially available, but they're much more expensive. And almost nobody puts a HEPA filter into their home HVAC system. We do think that if we, going forward, we are going to need to get some customization because as you'll see, the HEPA filter is what we need to do. And the ones we got were the cheapest ones I could find and had this metal housing, which is a whole lot more expensive. They're going to have to be cheaper for this to be something that people can use over a long period of time and replace filters. So we're going to need to work with filter manufacturers to be able to do HEPA filters with that are cheaper. And I do think that one of the big costs there is that metal housing.
So
Yeah, you can. Oh,
go ahead, Misa,
sorry.
and then I'll ask some questions.
I was gonna say you can kind of see the metal casing of the HEPA filter here in the picture, compared to the rest, which is just like cardboard. So yeah, that's all I was gonna point out.
Yeah, so a couple of questions for people who are new to the field of filtration and HVAC. Can you, first of all, do you, and if this is coming, then just say it's coming. But do you have a picture of the filter face so people can see how that filter looks? Then like the pleated part. Secondly, can you give a brief introduction to the names given to these filters? HEPA, MERV, those are all kind of jargony. And then can you talk a little bit about why their dimensions are 12 by 12 square?
You need me to take those, Misa?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, and if you're in the lab, because I don't think you have a picture of the face of the filter,
I
but if you're
don't.
in the lab, you could just go get it and put it up on your camera.
I'm also
People
not
can
in the
see.
lab, so that's
Okay.
not gonna work today.
So MERV stands for minimum effectiveness reporting value, minimum efficiency reporting value, and it is the higher the MERV, the better it is at getting small particles out. So it's a standard by ASHRAE, and it's just when the filter is clean, what percentage of particles over 3 size ranges does it get rid of. HEPA is high efficiency particle arrestants. That's the ones that are supposed to get like 99.9% of all particles at all sizes. So it's really, really extreme filtration. And so I chose the MERV 13 as one. That's what, when COVID was raging and everybody was talking about increasing their filtration, MERV 13 was what people were going to based on ASHRAE's recommendations. HEPA is going even another step. And so one of the questions was, can we get away with a MERV 13 and have it be effective enough to get rid of the particles? Because it's going to be a lot cheaper than doing HEPA. The 12 by 12 was basically my thoughts of what size duct could we reasonably put into a home for this system, and what size filter would be appropriate for that. So it is, it wasn't based on like a extensive calculation. It was more based on my experience in the field. What do I think we could get away with, and balance with what amount of flow do I think would need to go through in order to make sure that we could get the amount of filtration that we needed and the pressurization that we needed. And so this seemed like about as big as I thought we could easily go in most homes. Some homes you could certainly go larger, but this seemed like a good balance.
I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see the filters?
No,
No?
we're still seeing Misa's screen.
Oh, okay.
Should I stop sharing? Do you want
Yeah,
to
maybe
share?
maybe it's waiting for you to stop sharing. I just got, yeah, there you go. From filter by that. So that's how it looks. Like what you're seeing when Misa shows it is this cardboard side or metal, I guess. And then that's how it looks inside.
So
Okay.
that's only a MERV 8, and those are 1 inch. We were using 4-inch thick because that's better for airflow. But yeah, it still has the pleats. And so if you think about, if you took off the frame, the cardboard frame, and stretched it out, that's how much space you have to work with. So a 4-inch pleated, it's actually a huge surface area to work with to collect filters or collect particles. A 1-inch thick filter is much, much less material to work with, so it can be much more restrictive.
Yeah. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about filter selection. Like, there's a bunch of aspects that needed to be tested to make sure that it was up to the standard that we needed it to be. The duct, like moving on to other components, like the duct blaster, was kept at 120 CFM, with the salt particle concentration placed between, we tried 150 to 200 micrograms per cubic meter. I say tried.
Real quick, CFM stands for cubic feet per minute. So if you think about how many volleyball sizes worth of air going through the duct every minute, it's about 120.
Yeah, you're right. But when I say tried, I mean, it was very, because of the compressed air, you kind of had to play around with it to get it within this range. But we attempted to try and keep it consistent within this range throughout all the tests that we were taking. And then the tests were short for this aspect of the testing, between 30 minutes to an hour, because we weren't really focused on longevity at the time. There were also a couple of issues that like hindered the progress, in this aspect, a lot to do with the dust track itself. You'll see it on the next slide, but one of the dust tracks that was being used measured about 50 to 60 micrograms per cubic meter in the open air without the generation of a source, which was super weird. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out why, or just trying to understand it in general. And it wasn't until it was calibrated that it was fixed, but knowing that it could be calibrated relatively easily took a while to figure out. So big whoops there. There's also one functional dust track when I started, which required a lot of back and forth placement between the upstream and downstream with the same dust track. Eventually, we borrowed one that was in the Lassie lab, and then more recently, Paul purchased another dust track to give the Lassie one back, so we didn't have to use that one. And then another thing that posed some issues earlier on was the clogging of the nebulizer, due to the salt concentration, which prevented the generation of a sufficient amount of particle concentration, which sometimes meant stopping mid-test and having to clean it. But eventually just ended up leaving the nebulizer to soak in water in its jar, and I haven't had to clean it since. So that was a big upside. Did you have something to say, Paul? Oh, okay. So these are some of the results that came from the individual testing of the filters. The earlier tests used a singular dust tract, which again meant switching upstream and downstream about every 30 minutes. So that's what you see here. Upstream, downstream, upstream, downstream, upstream, downstream, or before the filter, after the filter. This first test was with the HEPA, 12 by 12 by 12 inches, which at the time when the zero of the dust tract was around 56 micrograms. But at the time that wasn't known. But after figuring that out, what was with what was going on the dust tract, we were able to determine that it was actually filtering out 100% of the particles that were being injected into the duct.
Real quick, on the x-axis is time, on the y-axis is particle concentration. I know the numbers are small. The numbers themselves are not as important as knowing what's on the axis, and then Misa will tell you what the results were.
Yeah, so that's what we found out with the HEPA 12 by 12 by 12 inch. And then we went and tested the HEPA 12 by 12 by 6 inch. And this was after the dust tract had been calibrated, so this one's like completely accurate. And this one showed a particle removal rate again of 100%. And then the MERV 13. This one was 12 by 12 by 4. I think it was the biggest MERV 13 that we had. And in this particular test, it only showed a 33% particle removal rate. But I guess it got up to 75% particle removal rate in tests performed before. But still, I guess like that wasn't enough. So based on these results from the first step of the filtration efficiency testing, we decided to move forward with the HEPA 12 by 12 by 6 because it offered 100% particle removal and it had a smaller depth than the 12 by 12 by 12. So we proceeded with this one for the remainder of the tests.
Is there a 4-inch thick one for the HEPA?
We did
No.
not have a 4-inch one.
No,
Okay.
I couldn't find a 4-inch. I could only find 6 and 12 of this style. There were some other HEPA filters that were 5 times the cost. I decided to skip those.
Yeah, so I think you're saying you tried, like the MERV would be better in terms of cost, but it's never going to do the job no matter how thick it is.
That's right.
Mhm.
Yeah, it just at even at the higher MERV levels, it's just still letting too many particles go through for the purposes of what we're trying to do. I mean, if it's 75% even, but it's 150 micrograms per cubic meter outside, that's a whole lot of particles getting through.
Yeah. So what did you have an acceptable number that you were shooting for?
90 was my minimum.
Okay.
And yeah, there are MERVs between 13 and HEPA, but once you get past MERV 14, they are extremely rare and you're not really saving money relative to just going to HEPA.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Nobody's buying MERV 16 filters without just going to HEPA.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thanks.
Cool. So FOCO local residents, what happened during August through November of 2020? What happened? What was here? It was bad.
Fire.
Yep.
Pretty fire.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Cameron Peak
From a
fire.
distance, fire.
That's right. So yeah, from what I heard, super horrible. also heard the skies were very, very beautiful and orange, but I mean, when you realize the beauty is pollution and terrible air quality, it kind of kills that scene. But anyways, hope those of you that lived here at the time has since restored your normal function to your lungs. Times are better. So we needed to gauge how long to actually test the performance of the filter and decided to base it off of this wildfire. Since it was a pretty intense event that affected Fort Collins. So here we have a graph provided by Christian, which shows the PM 2.5 concentration, particulate matter 2.5, basically just particles under 2.5 micron size throughout the duration of when the fire was present. So the blue curve tracks the 2.5 particulate matter during the fire, while the orange curve is the time outside of the wildfire with PM 2.5, but all within the same year. So I put little diagrams to hopefully make it a little easier to interpret the data. But looking first at the blue curve during the Cameron Peak fire, here 50% of the time the PM 2.5 was above 10 micrograms per cubic meter. It was like really hard for me to interpret it. So like if you guys have any questions, Paul can take it. It won't be me. The PM 2.5, 25% of the time was above 20 micrograms per cubic meter, which is that right here. So it was all right. Without the wildfire, 25% of the time, the PM 2.5 was greater than 10 micrograms per cubic meter. Same here, right here on the orange curve. And then 10% of the time, the PM 2.5 was above 20 micrograms per cubic meter. And so kind of translating this into like a time scale. There were 82 days between August 13th and November 2nd when the fire was running rampant. And that meant a total of 1968 hours when the fire was active. And so kind of basing it off of the 50%, 25%, that translated roughly to 984 hours where the PM 2.5 was above 10 micrograms per cubic meter. And then 25% of the time, 492 hours, I was above 20 micrograms per cubic meter. Same translation from without the wildfire, 25% of the time for the rest of the year, 1698 hours, where the PM 2.5 was greater than 10 micrograms per cubic meter. And then 10% of the time out of the rest of the year was 679 hours, where the PM 2.5 was greater than 20 micrograms per cubic meter. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. So obviously that's a lot of time to try and mimic for longevity. However, by testing at higher concentrations, we're kind of able to shorten the overall time frame required to perform the longevity testing. That was our mentality. So what does the last slide exactly tell us? So looking again at the graph and looking at the range relatively around the 150 to 200 microgram per cubic meter range, we see that that's between here 100 and 200. That only really happens around 4 to 5% of the time during the fire that the concentration was above this limit, which once translated to a specific time frame place us in the range of between 78 to 100 hours. So therefore we chose the longevity testing to last 80 hours that was placed within this range. I didn't really explain this earlier, but the 120 CFM is a value that's suitable for homes under conditions where wildfires are likely to be an issue, which is more in the summer, fall season, which is also why it was chosen kind of concretely. So here are some of the results in the particle concentration measurements during the first 2 hours of the longevity testing, well, 2.5, and then the last 2.5 hours of the longevity testing. Again, it's time, mass concentration for both. This is the upstream particle concentration before the filter. And then the green is downstream after the filter. So what does this like really tell us? The particle removal efficiency maintained 100% removal rate after 80 hours of testing. There was no deviation. It didn't increase downstream, like it kept at 0. So that was a pretty cool result. Didn't expect it to stay this clean after 80 hours of testing, but you know.
And you're also looking at pressure drop too, right? What happened to the pressure drop over that time?
Yeah. We'll
It's in a slide or
get,
two.
yeah, get to that soon. Here it's the same exact thing, same time range, beginning of the longevity testing, end of longevity testing. And this was just to really show that the airflow was maintained at 120 CFM. There was, yeah, it just stayed at 120 CFM. There was no really major change. Pressure drop. This was the pressure readings. So these are the measurements of the pressure drop data before and after the filter. At the beginning of the longevity testing and the end of the longevity testing, you can notice that at the beginning, the pressure drop was around 228-ish, while the end of the longevity testing moved down to around 260 pascals of pressure drop before and after the filter. So over time, through the period of the longevity testing, the pressure drop increased by 30 pascals, but had no influence whatsoever on the particle removal efficiency. The pressure drop was expected to increase due to the accumulation of the salt particles on the filter that kind of slowly accumulate and kind of increase the need for the flow to maintain 120 CFM. I don't know if that makes sense, but
My
yeah.
comment here is that that's only about a 10 to 15% change in pressure drop over 80 hours at 150 to 200 micrograms per cubic meter. So it's a pretty serious stress test. And the filter was able to collect all of that without really choking down, which was absolutely key. You could have a filter that does a great job, but if it chokes after 3 hours, it's not a practical device.
Yeah. So that was the result from the pressure drop from the longevity testing. So now this is what we moved on to. Currently progress, done 7 hours of flow rate dependency testing. Not really specific, wasn't really specific length to me, but trying to work towards a higher flow rate value. So from the 120 CFM that was used in previous tests, we turned the duct blaster to its max. But its max only increased the flow rate about 20 to 25 CFM, so around 140, 145 CFM total. So that's right here. It didn't really make that much of a difference, and it wasn't really what we wanted in terms of like a bigger flow rate. So that's going to be in the development, trying to find a way to kind of help further increase the flow to a higher range. And again, this is just two tests, the two tests that I've taken in flow rate dependency. So the only major significant thing here is the flow value.
Yes, we don't really have anything to say on this other than it is something we're working on. And I know that we can get a higher flow through a couple of different mechanisms, but we haven't gotten it set up for that just yet.
So this is like you want to do these tests at higher flows, and right now you can't get the duct blaster to make the flow to do those tests.
Exactly. And I know a couple of things that we could do to increase it, but this is just this past week and we didn't have time to really run that to ground. I would like to get up to 300 to 400 CFM. Jordan is working on trying to have a system that can do up to 800 CFM, but 800 is what you might need to fully pressurize a really tall, really leaky house in the dead of winter in a cold place. That's not what's needed for most of the time. But I would like to try to get to around 300.
Yeah. So 7 hours, not a lot of progress, but in the works. So next up, so what's coming up for us? So from here on out, heading into the summer, we have a couple more things to focus on for the filtration efficiency testing. First, exploring the affordability aspect of the HEPA filters, which again will be done trying to look at using smaller depths and cheaper non-metallic housings. The particle source is also something that will be getting looked at, since obviously the best thing to mimic wildfire smoke would be wildfire smoke in general, rather than salt concentrations. So that'll be a part of future development. And then finally, trying to find some sort of intervention to help increase the flow rate to try and match the flows that Jordan is working with. Which, as Paul mentioned, trying to aim towards 300 CFM at least. Yeah. So just to recap with the filter selections, HEPA 6-inch and HEPA 12-inch have the best particle removal rate of 100%, but went forward with the HEPA 6-inch due to the smaller depth with the same functionality. The longevity testing showed no significant effect on the particle removal efficiency, but the pressure drop did increase about 30 pascals over time due to the accumulation of particles on the filter. With the flow rate dependency, no real effect to the particle filtration efficiency currently, and the max flow rate setting on the duct blaster only increases about 20 CFM to 140-ish CFM. Other conclusions, filtration is super important, crucial to improving the indoor environment. Extensive filtration testing is needed to suitably fit a specific purpose. And there's still work to be done. So stay tuned for whatever else we got in the works. But yeah, that's it.
Yay. And by the way,
Yeah.
folks, that was Misa's first presentation to this group.
Yeah,
Yeah, good job. Thank you.
of course. I hope you guys understood what I was trying to say.
We're near the end of time right now. I think, like, if there's any questions, maybe put them in the chat and follow up with Misa, or Misa can get back to you because I'll record the chat. And then I want to remind folks that we're off next week because a lot of people are out for graduation. After that, Will has promised to do a interesting presentation from other work that he's done. And I am thinking that later this month, we should include getting back to a project overview, which we did at the very beginning of this project, but we have so many new people that I'd like to, I think it might be time to bring that back. So yeah, good. Thank you, everyone. And feel free to visit Misa in the Airy Lab if you're in Powerhouse.
Please, I get lonely.
Well done, Misa.
Thank you. But yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. But that's it for me.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay.
guys. Thanks for the fun icebreaker.
Of course, love everyone's pet peeves.
Like I'm
Okay.
probably caught doing all of those things at some point in public, so forgive
Yeah.
me.
I wasn't meant to make anybody feel feel like they're a bad person.
Oh, no, of course. I thought it was cute. Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good
Bye.
job, Misa.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, Christian, can you stay on for a bit? Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna